This video is brought to you by John Robson Guitar Tuition. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting the channel by enrolling on a course, purchasing some guitar lessons or a t-shirt, or simply making a donation. Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, I do hope you're well. Now, you may recall that before Christmas I did a bunch of videos that were like price comparison guides. You know, what's the best Telecaster for 300 quid or less? What's the best Strat? What's the best Les Paul, etc. for a budget of 300 quid? And that's essentially what we're doing today, but at the suggestion of someone who left a comment on one of those videos, today we're looking at amplifiers. We're looking at what is the best all-round combo for a budget of £300 or less. And by all-round, I mean something that you can use as your amp. You know, not your gigging amp as opposed to your practice amp at home. These are all amps that you can you know, kind of keep the volume down nice and low at home or crank it up when you're on stage. Most of these are solid state combos, but not all of them, as you will see. And well, I guess the next thing to do is to take a look at the lineup. Here it is. Absolutely any lineup of amplifiers in this price range simply has to include the Peavey Bandit 112. It's a little bit over budget at 322 quid, but that's not going to break the bank, quite frankly. So what do you get? Well, it's an 80 watt 1x12 combo, which climbs to 100 watts if you use an extension 8 ohm speaker. Let's take a look at the front panel here while we talk about the features. You can see that there is a clean channel and a lead channel with an independent EQ for each channel. Moreover, each channel has different voicings that can be employed. On the clean channel, you get vintage, classic and warm. On the lead channel, classic, modern and high gain. High gain and low gain inputs, built-in spring reverb, and this little feature here is nice, a foot switchable boost. I remember back in, I think it was the 90s, when Peavey first started trumpeting this trans-tube technology. It was their big thing. They were quite proud of the fact that they had made a solid-state amplifier that sounded and responded like a valve amplifier. And we all read the press release and thought, yeah, okay, Peavey, well done, we'll see. And fair play to them, it does actually do what they claim. Of all of the solid-state amplifiers I've ever played through, and it's been quite a few, this amplifier is the one that tends to respond and feel the most like a valve amp. So there you go, the Peavey Bandit 112. How many gigs at your local pub have you been to and seen one of these up on stage? There's a reason why people tend to choose this amplifier. Moving on to the Marshall MG50 FX, which is about 240 quid. In round numbers. And what do you get for that money? Well, you get a 50 watt 1x12 solid state combo with the word Marshall written on the front. In addition to that, you get a bunch of effects: reverb, chorus, flange, phase, octave, vibrato, delay, etc. And you can use 2 of those effects simultaneously. 4 analog channels, which are fully programmable, essentially meaning that you can treat this amp a little bit like a multi-effects unit and just program in patches and call them up with the foot switch, which you do get a rather basic foot switch included in the price of the amp. Other manufacturers, please take note. Next we come to the Line 6 Spider 5 120 Mark II. Exactly what you'd expect from Line 6. Oodles and oodles of options and features on this amplifier. It would take all day to list them all and cover them, but let's just look at the edited highlights. You get a 1B12 custom full range speaker and tweeter. So basically, essentially like a PA speaker kind of setup, so that when you plug in an external music source like an MP3 player or some source of jam tracks, then it will play those back with a more hi-fi like quality. You also get artist and song presets by a lot of people here, many of whom I've even heard of. People like Josh Smith, Devin Townsend, Jeff Loomis, Ola England, Fluff, etc., etc. So a lot of people who know what a good guitar sound adds up to have spent some time and effort delivering tones for this amplifier, which is encouraging. Let's just take a look at the front panel of the speaker here. So nice, clean and uncluttered, but you do have the dreaded LCD menu screen to peer into as you are navigating your way around the sounds. As I've said, not necessarily my cup of tea, but I think that's more of a reflection on me than it is of the amp, to be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of Line 6 gear, it has to be said, but plenty of people are and seem to get very, very good tones out of their equipment. Not something I've ever managed, so this wouldn't be the amp for me, but here it is, just in case you're curious about the features. Okay, next let's have a look at the Vox VT100X, 219 quid's worth of Vox Valvetronics technology. Before we get into the features of the amp, I just want to mention here that the way the amp is laid out, basically. Now, I get it. I get why they've put the controls on the top panel here. It looks kind of vintage and retro and cool, and, you know, along with the checkered grill cloth there, it does sort of have that AC30 vibe about it. But there's a good reason why amp manufacturers in the 70s began putting their, or many amp manufacturers, began putting their controls on the front panel rather than the top panel. When you're on stage and you're at the front of the stage and you want to just glance back at your amplifier to see where the knobs are, you can do it if the knobs are on the front panel. When they're on the top panel like this, they're hidden and you have to walk over to your amp and peer down at the top panel and everything. It's not the most ergonomic layout. I get it, it's vintage and retro and cool and everything, but it wouldn't be my favoured place to put the controls. That said, I am a massive fan of the Vox Valvetronics technology and the tones that it produces. As you know, I've been, as you probably know anyway, I've been a massive fan of the Vox Valvetronics Tone Lab amp modeler for many a year. I've had various different amp modelers over the years. I've had everything from the lowly Line 6 pod in its original incarnation when it first came out. Wasn't really my cup of tea, it has to be said. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I actually had an extended loan, if you like, of one of the first generation of Axe effects that came out, what was it, about 10, 11 years ago. And I've always found the Tone Lab, the humble little 150 quid Tone Lab that I use, to be, you know, the best source of sounds for me. It gives me the sounds that I like. So this amplifier here has the same technology. It's a 100 watt 1x12 hybrid amplifier using a 12AX7 preamp tube, 11 different amp models, or 20 when using the bundled software. And, you know, you get Deluxe Clean, Tweed 4x10, Vox AC30, Brit 800, obviously a Marshall reference there, and a bunch of others as well. What else do we get? Different types of effects, compression, chorus, overdrive, flanger, phaser, tremolo, different reverbs, a plethora of effects, and you get 33 programs. I guess that means, oh no, user programs 8, so you've got 2 banks of 4 channels. You can essentially call up 8 different sounds, 8 different patches, if you like, when using this amp, which is absolutely plenty for any gig, I would wager. So there you go, the Vox VT100X. And finally, we come to the only all-valve amp in the lineup, the Bajirao V22 Infinium at 246 quid. Now, it's a 22 watt amp, so there will be some people who are thinking, that's not going to be loud enough to gig with. But the old adage that valve watts are louder certainly is true in this case. I was at a gig over Christmas, and just a local pub gig, you know, watching a blues band, and the guitarist was using one of these, and he was loud, okay, no problems at all hearing him over the drummer. Nothing mic'd up, you know, you were just kind of hearing the sound coming from the amp on stage, and it was plenty loud enough, let me tell you. So it's a 22 watt amp, all valve. You've got 12 AX7s in the preamp and EL84s in the power amp. 1B12 turbo sound speaker, normal and bright inputs. This is basically an old school amp. It's an amp that you know, you're not going to be peering into little menu displays and navigating different options like that on this amplifier. What you see is what you get. Let's take a look at that front panel, shall we? There we go. So normal and bright inputs, clean, with essentially a channel switch there. Then you've got gain, volume, bass, mid, treble. So it's a shared EQ for both channels. Built-in reverb, digital reverb on this amp, not a spring reverb, which is a bit of a surprise. Although I suppose, you know, the technology is so cheap now that you can just, you know, why bother with a spring reverb tank when you can just plug in a chip essentially and get your reverb that way. Great sounding little amp. And for the price, you know, 246 quid for an amp that sounds like this and has you know, a real old school vibe about it, and just produces a fantastic sound. Not much in the way of effects, you know, you get your built-in reverb, and that's it, you know. So if you want chorus and delay and flange and all that, you're going to be buying some pedals. Switchable between triode and pentode, and so, you know, you can change the character of the sound there. As I say, sitting in the audience listening to one of these amps, I was absolutely blown away by just the warmth and the presence, and just how expensive it sounded, basically, when it's not really an expensive amplifier at all. So there you go, the Bajirao V22 Infinium. So there it is, that's your lineup of combos for 300 quid or thereabouts or less. Make of it what you will. Now, we come to the important question of what would I buy if I was spending my own money? Well, let me tell you what I wouldn't buy. It wouldn't be the Line 6. I've tried and used various Line 6 products over the years. I've not tried a Helix, fair enough, but I have tried various pods and other Line 6 pieces of kit right the way back to, do you remember the Line 6 Axis amp from the 90s? Had a bit of a go at one of those years ago. Bottom line is, I've never come across a piece of Line 6 gear that I can get the sound out of that I like, and I have no reason to suspect that this amp would be any different. I also don't like amplifiers where you've got to squint into a little readout in order to adjust the tone, or you've got multi-function knobs that do different things depending upon which menu you're in, or whether you press and hold or just hold it down. It's just not me, really, and I understand that says more about me than it does about the amp. Yes, I am a boring old fart, but there you go, I am what I am, I suppose. On the topic of which I would buy, well, I'm spoilt for choice here. I was blown away by the sound of that little Bajirao amp when I heard it at the gig, but it's a valve amp, and, you know, there are reliability issues that come bundled in with that, you know, and its valves are consumable items that need replacing from time to time, so there's the upkeep and everything. The Vox Valvetronics amp, notwithstanding what I said about the controls being in the wrong place on the top panel, I am absolutely over the moon with the tones I get out of my Vox Valvetronics amp modeler, so I would imagine that those sounds are equally accessible in that amp, and that would certainly do for me. The Peavey Bandit, now there's one. Little story for you, true story. About 11, 12 years ago, I was in a classic 70s rock band, and we were rehearsing one night at this facility that had a bunch of different rehearsal rooms. The other guitarist in the band, who was also the singer, he was using, let me kind of tell you his rig, he was using a Fender 50th anniversary American Strat, via a whole slew of Boss and Electro Harmonix pedals going into a Marshall DSL stack. And, you know, that was his rig. And then we were having a bit of a break from rehearsing, and a guy came in who was in another band who was rehearsing in the room next door, and he just came in because we sort of knew each other, and just to kind of, you know, have a bit of a natter, basically. And he said to me, "Oh, you're getting an excellent sound out of that Marshall, aren't you?" And I hated to break the news to him that I was actually plugged into the Peavey Bandit. It didn't go down. I was playing actually a vintage Trev Wilkinson branded Strat copy into a Peavey Bandit, and I get told what a fantastic sound I'm getting. You know, and the other guy's using a expensive US limited edition Fender into a all-valve Marshall stack, and the guy who was listening to us thought that I was the one plugged into the Marshall. So that says a lot about the sound of the Peavey. I was absolutely 100% happy with that as a workhorse gigging amp, and yeah, it got the job done, and it's a Peavey. So, you know, it'll pretty much work underwater if you need it to. Reliability is certainly not going to be an option. So, on balance, if I had to choose, I think it would be the Peavey Bandit. That's the one that my hard-earned beer tokens would be exchanged for. So there you go. Make of that what you will, but those are my views on what are the best combos for around 300 quid or less. Hope you've enjoyed this video, found it useful, informative, and maybe in some way a little bit inspiring. And if that's the case, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you haven't already done so. And why not give me a like while you're at it? And pretty much that's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time around. Bye for now.